This is Teachers Talk Radio, and you are listening live.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to our Wednesday Twilight Show. I'm your host, Michelle, and joining me tonight is an exemplary leader in the field of education. Together, we will discuss the challenges of authentic leadership, look at some of the challenges and how to overcome them, whilst creating a sense of balance and maintaining one's integrity. Stay tuned.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and you are listening live. Tune in live at ttradio.org, or to join in the conversation, download the Podbean app and search Teachers Talk Radio. Follow the hashtag TTRadio. Tune in, talk it out with Teachers Talk Radio.
Welcome once again, everyone. It's another fortnight, and we are here to continue the discussion on leading without the mask. And the focus at the moment is on authentic leadership. So, hopefully, tonight we'll gain some more insight into what that is all about. And I'd just like to reflect a little bit, as usual, on the previous show and what we've learned from that, and some of the responses and reactions to the show as well. So last fortnight, my guest Andrew Wilkinson and we introduced the series on authentic leadership. And as I said before, the main theme is leading without the mask. So we started off by defining it according to theorists and, of course, our own personal experiences, concluding that authenticity requires accountability, humility, self-reflection, and of course, an understanding that as leaders, we don't always have the answers. But what we can do is let people know that when we don't have the answers, but also let them know this is something we will explore and get back to them. And there's nothing wrong with that. That is being true to who you are. He also talked about the fact that it's okay to show your vulnerabilities. And of course, that within measure. I remembered somebody, one of the listeners online said, but how do you balance that with competence? So if you show your vulnerability, how do you then come across to your team as being competent? And we talked about that as well, and the importance of making sure that you are also prepared, but to be honest and open enough to accept that there are certain things that may not be your strength, certain things that you are still developing, or certain areas you're still developing in. And it's okay to let people know that. And then, when you do that, you will gain their respect. And as a leader, that's when you play to people's strengths and you get them to do the things or to support you rather on those things that you might find a little bit challenging or that you're still developing. We talked about disagreeing but committing for the greater good. And we talked about that, especially when the question was raised about what if you're asked to do something that is against your own morals or your own integrity. And Andrew outlined that sometimes you just have to disagree, show your opinion, but of course in a respectful way, and commit for the good of our students or for the learning community. He also mentioned something which I found particularly intriguing and interesting. And he said we should avoid the illusion of choice, not to allow people in our team to think that they have a choice in a decision when we already have the decision made and when we already know exactly what we intend to do, but yet we give people the illusion of choice. And he said we should try to avoid that and make sure that everyone in the organization is heard and that they feel belonged, that they feel listened to, and that is so important. We also questioned if sometimes we might be required to lead with a mask. And I recall Andrew saying how we've opened a can of worms. Does the mask have its place? And when do we have to use it, or do we have to at all? So tonight we will continue the discussion, and we'll be looking at when authenticity gets uncomfortable. can you stay real when it gets real? So we're hoping to have a very frank, honest, and open conversation about that. When authenticity gets uncomfortable, because it will. Can you stay real when it gets real? So before I introduce tonight's guest, we are going to take a short break and listen to our sponsors. When we come back, I will introduce tonight's guest and hopefully get straight into the discussion. Do stay tuned.
Need a smarter way to teach? Wish your lessons had more impact? Eduflix.com. Stream educational films for teachers and students in or out of the classroom. Keep students engaged. No ads, no distractions. Try it free for 30 days at eduflix.com/try. Use code TTR. Get 50% off all orders made before June 1st. Eduflix.com.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Don't miss out. Level up your professional development today and visit johncattbookshop.com to explore the full range of titles. Use the code JCTTR2425 for 20% off your order.
Thank you for that. And I am just waiting for my guest. I know I can tell she's online, and I'm just hoping that she will be able to join us shortly and be able to be a part of tonight's show. So I am going to go straight into the show. And even before we get started on what we have prepared, there's a question coming in immediately. What is your take on the so-called woke education and how it affects teaching in grade schools if you get a chance? So I'm presuming grade school means primary. Please correct me if I'm wrong. Grade school sounds rather American. I don't know if you could clarify if that is primary or secondary or if it means something else. So my take on woke education. So if I were to interpret woke as in the term, or primary, thank you, woke in the sense of being aware, then I went to a conference recently, and one of the presenters spoke about this and he said that education today is being built on more research or being developed on more research. So I guess with more research, maybe that then you can define it as woke education, because it means that we're becoming more aware. And so our vocation is becoming more of a profession, so to speak, because things are created and built and designed around research more so, especially in the 21st century. So my take on woke education is that if it means what I'm saying, and that is as having that strong sense of awareness, not just on the academic front, but the social, the cultural aspects of things as well, then I think that is the right direction we should take. Being so aware of the things that we're inputting in our students and the outcomes of that, or the intended outcomes of such input. So being aware of that and making sure that we have the tools to do that. And so if that's what woke means, then I'm all for that. Making sure that we understand what is required of us and that education is not siloed. And later on in the show, I will also ask my guest the same question, because I think it's a good one. So education for me, it is no longer this detached thing. Well, I don't think it has ever been, but it's not siloed. And, we exist in a society that is so-called woke as well. A society that is increasingly becoming aware of our rights and our boundaries. And so I think in education, it's important that we adapt that as well. And it goes across the board, whether it's primary or secondary. I think it is important that we have this strong awareness. If you're referring to bringing the woke movement into education, I think it has its place. And I think the curriculum should be able to accommodate that. And that should also be in the hidden curriculum as well, the way we address our students in our PSHCE and all of that. And it's for me, it's all about raising awareness. In primary school, the approach will be very different from maybe secondary school, but I do think there are means and ways of getting around that. I'm not too familiar with the primary curriculum, but I do believe that there are means and ways of ensuring that in education we are woke as well, and that we're conscious of the things that are impacting on us as a society, as a group of people, especially when we consider that we exist in a multicultural setting. We need to be woke. We need to understand the things that might still be offensive, and then make sure that our students understand how to navigate those. So that's my take on it. And the person who asked the question, please, if you wish to add more and tell us your opinion as well, go for it. If I completely misunderstood your question, do clarify. And I'm hoping that my guests will be able to shed some light on that as well, or anybody else who's joining tonight. So, welcome to those of you who've already joined. Please remember to download the Podbean app so you may call in or send us a message. So, without further ado, let me pause to welcome tonight's guest, and I'm honored to welcome another special guest to the Twilight Show, and none other than Miss Jenniece Anderson, a seasoned education leader with a rich and diverse background that spans leadership roles in both the UK and international schools. She has taught in both the public and private sectors, gaining invaluable pedagogical, personal, and professional skills. Her educational philosophy is rooted in the belief that great education inspires minds, thus, her commitment to developing the holistic child. She's a staff governor and is a certified neurolinguistic programming coach. She brings strong mentoring and coaching to leadership, ensuring that current and aspiring leaders are given clear guidance and support. And there's a lot more I could have said about Jenniece, but I'll give her a chance to do that later on. So, welcome to our Twilight Show, Jenniece, and thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you so much, Michelle, for that lovely introduction. And it's a pleasure to be here. Forgive me, my throat is going. I have a sore throat.
That's okay. Sore throats sometimes do come off very sultry in a very sultry way, so it's okay. It's translating well here at the moment. So thank you so much. So we're going to go straight into the discussion because, believe it or not, the time goes by so quickly. And before we start the questions on authentic leadership, could you share with us a little bit about your own leadership journey so far?
Yes, I've been in education for over 20 years. I can't believe the time went so fast.
Yeah.
My journey started in Jamaica, where I first trained and taught. I later moved to the UK and continued my teaching career there, taking on leadership roles in a variety of settings. After that, I embraced international educational schools. First, I was in Dubai, actually Qatar for 2 years, then Dubai for 4 years, and then later in Cairo, Egypt for another 2 years. Each location had its challenges, and but it shaped me in different ways, deepening my understanding of leadership across different cultures and different educational systems. When I returned to the UK in 2020, it was right in the middle of the pandemic. And then I joined my current school in London. I now serve as head of art, a staff governor, and I've held the role of associate assistant principal for outreach across the Federation Trust. So my leadership journey has been truly global, spanning from large selective school to more diverse, more challenging communities. The breadth of the schools that I've taught at has really taught me the skill of adaptability and authenticity, no matter the context.
Oh, fantastic. That is impressive. Wow. So you've taught across the Middle East, and in Cairo. That is amazing. And yes, I'm
Yes.
hoping to hear a little bit more about that. As you mentioned, it taught you adaptability and authenticity as well. So we'll delve
Hmm.
some more into that. Very impressive. Thanks for sharing with us.
Thank
Um,
you.
and somebody is giving some advice here, Jenniece. I don't know if you want to take this advice, but I will share it with you. And they're suggesting that you should have some lemon and honey tea. So I think that's a good shout, actually.
Yeah, thank you. I will do. Well, will do after this.
Awesome. Right. So let's just get straight into the discussion around authentic leadership. And you've mentioned that just now, but what does it mean to you?
Um, for me, authentic leadership means leading from a place of truth. My truth is rooted in my Jamaican upbringing, where resilience, service, and pride were everyday values. So I learned from an early age that leadership isn't just about titles, but it's about lifting up other people. And so as I moved across different countries and different educational systems, um, sometimes I faced challenges and even underestimated and overlooked. But it's these experiences that have actually shaped my clarity and my compassion. It's through my story, it's through my history, it's through my heritage and my own lived experience that all form part of my authentic self. So every school, every team, every child have all led and added value and layer to who I am.
Oh, thank you so much. We seem to have a few things in common there, our Jamaican roots and heritage and
Yes.
overseas teaching. I'm just going to refer to some of the things you mentioned there. And you said it comes from your Jamaican roots, that show of resilience and
Hmm.
call to service and
Hmm.
pride. If you could elaborate a little bit on the aspect of pride and clarify, please.
Yeah, so for me, authentic leadership is, as you said, is about identity. It's that knowing that, that we have a saying in Jamaica, we're little but we talawa. And it's for me knowing that there's others that's gone ahead of me, showing those leadership skills and quality, and I feel obligated in a sense to follow that journey and to make sure that I'm setting a good example for the next generation as well. So for me, authentic journey is really about your my personal journey,
Mhm.
my being courageous, being consistent between my words and my actions and my willingness to grow. So how that would show up in my normal school day is um leading with pride, but
Mhm.
also showing consistency that is visible in every action that I do, creating a culture where staff and students feel seen and heard, and remaining committed to continuous learning and inviting feedback from others as well.
Yeah, I love that. And so leading with pride is taking pride in your role and your
Hmm.
responsibility, but not necessarily
Exactly.
meaning that you're arrogant about it as a leader. And I really like what you said earlier as well, that in leadership, it's ensuring that we listen to others, we allow them to feel heard. That is so important, and we
Hmm.
covered that last week as well. Another thing you mentioned, Jenniece, which resonates well with me, is not leading because of the title. And I mean, increasingly, we see people entering leadership because of the title or because of the remuneration. But it's so
Yes.
important that we're doing it because we want to serve and because we want to develop others. These are some of the things you said. Um, Also, it's important, and I read this somewhere recently, that to be a good leader and to be an authentic leader, you draw on your experiences, and you elaborated on that just now. You said your story and your history. All of these things do help to shape us as leaders. So that
Hmm.
is such a wonderful thing and a wonderful takeaway for my guests. If you're a teacher or you're leading in any capacity, that as a leader, you have to draw on those stories and your history and your experiences. And as Jenniece said, be courageous and be consistent in every single thing that you do. As you said, each day you show up, you're consistent in all your actions and the way you speak. Thank you so much for sharing that.
Thank
Um,
you.
so, what does being real under pressure look like for you in practical terms? Because you talked about being seen and heard. What does that look like?
Um, for me, I remain people-centered under pressure, because I'm a big fan of relationships. um, this, shaping, the school values around communication and relationships. One of my most testing moments in my leadership was during the period of intense curriculum reform and a looming deadline for a trust-wide curriculum and quality assurance. Um, it was towards the end of the pandemic when I just came back from to the UK. So it was a lot that was going on at the time, so the pressure was high as everyone was already stretched. And I knew that the work had to be done, but also I knew that pushing through without care would not be sensible thing to do. I had to think about the well-being of my staff. And so because I was going to be working across federation to have this curriculum map in place, I sat down with my team and I asked questions. I said, what what's manageable and what support do you need in getting this done? And I worked across the Federation Trust to design and implement a curriculum map of the art journey from early years all the way up to key stage 5, which is year 12 and 13, by redirecting and redistributing certain tasks, but keeping communication flowing throughout. So, yes, we met the deadline, but more importantly, I think the strengthening of the relationships that I built was more important with my secondary and primary colleagues. That's what's always stayed with me, because for me leadership means holding both the pressure but also
Mhm.
the people, because when the challenges pass, at the end of the day you only are left with the relationships that you've built. That's what sustains team,
Yes.
making those relationships. That's what people are going to remember, sustaining those relationships.
Yeah. Oh, fantastic. And you just mentioned something here. You're giving us lots of takeaways tonight, by the way, Jenniece.
Thank you.
Let me pause to welcome those of you online. My former Sunday school teacher, who's a very young woman, by the way, uh, she's online. Thank you so much for joining. I hope you'll enjoy tonight's show, and everybody else. Please, you may call in if you wish, or send us a message, or ask a question, or make a comment. We would love to hear from you. So, Jenniece, you talked about pushing without care. What do you think would be some of the consequences of that if, as leaders, we keep pushing without caring for the people?
I think it will be a boiling point for some staff as well. You talk about staff retention, you talk about staff going off ill for long periods of time. And
Mhm.
at the end of the day, that affects the students. And we want to do the best for our students. We want to make sure that staff are in school, and we can, do better by them by making sure that there's a work-life balance.
Mhm. Thank you. And let me also explain something as well. Earlier on, Janice said that as a Jamaican, we're taught that we're little, but we're talawa. So in true Jamaican style, we say little, but with talawa. And it just
Yes,
means that we're a relatively small island, but we're a force to be reckoned with. And I'm sure
indeed.
you'll all agree, because wherever you go across the world, you mention Jamaica, at least one person will know about this small island. Let me just say quickly, relatively small island, because we don't consider ourselves as a small island. That's one of the things as well about us Jamaicans. Right. So let me just move on to the next question, Denise, and thank you for sharing those insightful comments so far. Why do you think authenticity makes people uncomfortable, especially in leadership or, say, in high stakes environments? What makes it
That's
so
a
uncomfortable to be
Yeah,
true
that's
to
a
ourselves?
that's a good one. I think authenticity can feel uncomfortable in leadership because people think it is asking us to show up as a finished product. It's also that people might have preconceived ideas of what authenticity actually looks like. And when we don't meet those expectations, that's what causes the discomfort. What I do know, I normally kind of lean into that discomfort. I make my personality and my character speak for itself.
Hmm.
So I think as a leader, you must embrace discomfort in order to grow because you can't have comfort and growth in the same space. You have to have discomfort in order to grow as a leader. So I would lean into that. Trust what sustains team through challenges. So they're not looking, teams are not looking for a person, a leader who's perfect. What they want to know is that they can trust you to get through to whatever challenges that you have.
Oh, thank you so much. Do you find that a lot of us or a lot of people approach leadership thinking that they are the finished product? And what is the downside to thinking like that?
I think so because I feel like I don't, you've not come up to that yet, but I think that's one of the myths that authenticity is a fixed state.
Hmm.
And it's not a fixed state, it's what feels authentic at the start of your career, when you're just learning to lead, might look quite different later on when you're leading at maybe a senior leadership role. Your
Hmm.
influence and your impact is much greater. So at an early leader, maybe a head of year, it will look quite different from somebody that is a vice principal. So I would say leadership, it's just not fixed. It's something that is an ongoing conversation that you have to think about your context. You have
Hmm.
to think about where you are in your career. You have to think about the kind of impact that you're making. So it's not a fixed state.
Yeah. So I think you're so right. So it's important as a leader we understand that we're not the finished product. And as you said,
Yes.
that our context will determine where we're at and our years of experience as well. But then how do we ensure that the people we're leading understand that we are still work in progress? Because the people we lead will sometimes expect us to be the finished product. How do we overcome that?
It's through communication and leading by example. I always inspire my team to read, to research, go through making sure that they're making evidence informed decisions as well. So,
Mhm.
by my example, by how I'm leading, they see and they know that, I can make mistakes as well, and I'm not the perfect finished product. But I think having an open conversation, not just within your team, but as a school, in your staff meetings, I think if we are willing to have those free conversations, I think staff will be able to recognize that it's about making sure that it's an open conversation to understand that we're not finished yet, isn't it?
Yeah. And it's a learning curve. And we're on
Yes,
this journey, and there will be obstacles along the way, and challenges and mistakes. And it's important that as a team, we all recognize that we're in this together. And
exactly.
yeah, and we're learning together. I love the comment you made that we should lean into our discomfort, embrace
Hmm.
it in order to grow. So, do you have any practical tips for leaders and how to do that? Because sometimes in the moment of discomfort, people will react differently. Some people might want to walk away from the discomfort. So, how do we then lean in? Any practical tips on that?
Yeah, I'll give you an example. When I returned to the UK after working internationally, I stepped into leadership role in a very different educational space. So I'd left the UK 8 years. So I spent about 8 years in the Middle East. And when I came back in 2020, it was a different educational landscape.
Mm-hmm.
There was a real temptation for me to prove myself quickly, right? But instead, what I chose to do was to lead with honesty by asking questions, listening deeply,
Mm-hmm.
and um, and that made some people uncomfortable. The fact that I was asking question, asking them for their opinion, that made some people uncomfortable because in high stake environments, as you know, busy schools, and
Mm-hmm.
especially working in an inner city school in London, there's often that unspoken expectation that leaders or leadership means having it all figured out, as we've said, right? So,
Mm-hmm.
but I've learned that resilience isn't just about pushing through constantly. It's also being open to change and leading with that humility that you don't know everything, and that you can be uncomfortable sometimes. So for me, authentic leadership isn't just about a performance, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or always wanting to be right. It's about being grounded enough in your purpose that you can admit with confidence that you can lead in an uncomfortable space sometime, and to create a space for others to grow alongside you. It's not just about you. It's about your team. It's about the school culture, making sure that everybody feel heard. So that level of openness challenges the traditional models of leadership,
Mm-hmm.
when you're able to lead with being uncomfortable at the same time. And I'll share a quote by I think it's Simon Sinek, that says
Mm-hmm.
leadership is not just about being in charge; it's about taking care of those that you're in charge of.
Oh, fantastic. And that it's not just about being in charge, but taking care of those you're in charge of and making sure that when you embrace those discomforts, you do it in such a way that you are indirectly teaching your team something.
Yes.
Because it is a well-known saying that we tend to mimic or emulate the people who've led us at different points in our own journey. And so it's important that we exemplify those skills and the values that we'd like to pass on to future leaders as well. So thank you so much for sharing that. Lean into the discomfort. It's not always easy. So I'm sure you'll agree with me, Jenniece, that we can't just say, yeah, just lean in. It's not always easy to
No.
embrace the discomfort, but it's important that we push through it and do
Yes.
that courageously as well, and admit when, yeah, we've made a mistake and it's okay. We've made this mistake. Let's reflect and let's move on and learn from it and grow from it. That's so important. I have a question for you from somebody online.
Okay.
And she says, what if your line manager does not create the psychological safety to be authentic and uses your mistakes or weaknesses to belittle you? So you are a leader and you don't think your line manager has created that safe space for you to be authentic. How do you overcome that? That's a very good question.
Yes. You know, it's always difficult when you're not feeling in that safe space with the person that you're supposed to kind of trust to lead you,
Hmm.
because that relationship between your line manager and yourself is always a very close relationship, because that person is supposed to be giving you not just managerial stuff, tasks to do, but to be giving you strategical information as well.
Hmm.
So it's a really sensitive, delicate kind of role to kind of juggle. But what I would suggest is that you do not shrink to fit in. I think that you should be rooted in your own self-confidence. And you need to, and as I've talked about my own story, I think you need to
Hmm.
just lean back on that, to lean back on your own lived experience. um, and often you have to be diplomatic, in the sense that if you cannot find the support, in your line manager. It might mean that you find it from somebody else in your school that you trust. um, and even sometimes I've worked in schools that it's a very toxic working environment. You might have to then decide to widen your network outside the school context and find either a coach or a mentor outside the school that will give you that those those kind of support and advice that you need. So again, it's not just about relying on one source or one person, such as your line manager, to give you that to give you that support. Is to
Mhm.
remember that you don't fit in, be rooted in who you are, and find the help outside that context.
Thank you so much. I think that is very well explained. And also, I suggest that land manager should listen back to this show because they'll gain some invaluable insights that we're still we're still work in progress. We're not the complete package. We never will be because there's always room for growth and development. And if we are reflective in our practice, then we will recognize that there's always room for improvement, and we should never ever think that we are the perfect model of leadership. So, some great takeaway there for the person who asked the question. And I like, in particular, something Jenniece said: do not shrink to fit in. Be your authentic self and find some support. And if it's not within the school, as she suggested, it could be outside of the school because sometimes you need to vent with others outside of your school, immediate school environment, because sometimes it's safer to do so. So hopefully that helped. The person who asked the question said thank you, Jenniece. So thank you so much for that.
Yeah.
And before we take another short break, just one more question for you, Jenniece, before we move on. How do you differentiate between being authentic and being reactive, or even unfiltered in challenging situations? Because a lot
Okay.
of times people claim that they're being proactive, but in essence, they're actually being reactive. How do we differentiate?
Okay. Here's the thing. I think authenticity isn't just about saying the first thing that's on your mind or the first thing that comes to your mouth. It's about being discerning and
Mhm.
being intentional. And when I talk about discerning, I'm talking about using wisdom, especially leaders who are new to leadership. I find that especially if a staff comes to them with a complaint or whatever, they just take it as face value. You have to be discerning what's the agenda behind that staff coming to you about
Mhm.
a particular issue. In challenging these situations, I always pause and I often speak more slowly, and I hold a quick staff meeting within myself internally.
Mhm.
Um, yes, and and sorry, my
Sorry,
headphones.
Denise, as long as you're not taking on the voices of the different people, that's fine.
Yes, my headphones just went off. Yes, as I've said, I normally have a quick staff meeting within myself. Sometimes if if something is challenging that's happening just now, and tend to say to myself, does this align with what my values are? And if not, you know, do I need to say this? Or will it add value to that person, or will it make the situation worse? So, as a
Mhm.
leader, I've learned that being authentic means showing up as the greatest version of myself in that moment, showing up with empathy and integrity.
Mhm.
So people will not remember, as I said, the challenging situation in the weeks and the months to come. But what they will definitely remember is how you make them feel.
Mhm.
So, as a leader, my role is in it to enable positive and supportive school culture for both staff and students. And so, being discerning and intentional is very important.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I love how you started that response by saying not being too quick to speak, something along those lines.
Yes.
Think about it, process it, have those internal meetings, and work through the process yourself. And sometimes taking the emotions out of it if possible. Think about the issue at hand and focus on the facts. Avoid the blaming. Focus on the facts and the issue at hand and how to resolve it, rather than looking for who started it, who's responsible. And I think that will make a world of a difference as well. I also have another question before I go to the break, and I'll just take this last question and then we'll have a short break. And somebody's asking, how do you respond to micromanaging by the higher ups? How do you then be your authentic self when you're being constantly micromanaged?
Yeah,
They're asking if you have a solution that works for you.
for me, I'm about to laugh because I refuse to be micromanaged. I refuse to be micromanaged. So maybe that person think that they're micromanaging me, but I will do what I think is the best thing. So I would say be diplomatic, and there's always different ways of saying no, and the no doesn't have to be verbal. It could be through actions. And so I feel like there's different ways of communicating,
Hmm.
that not that you don't appreciate being micromanaged, but it also goes back to this kind of relationship that you're either building with whoever is line managing you, and also the school culture. So you want to make sure that the school culture is as such that that sort of micromanagement is not encouraged. And so it's about empowering yourself to speak up, and whether you're going to be speaking up by saying this is not appropriate, or speak up by not saying anything, because your action is says something as well. So you need to choose which one's going to be appropriate for you depending on the school context, because um, with my experience working overseas as well, sometimes you have to think about the cultural sensitivity of where you're working as well, and what might have been a good answer. And that's why I'm kind of dodging around this, because it depends on where you're working and the context that you're working at. What might work in a UK context in terms of micromanagement is going to be far different in probably working in an international school. And so it really boils down to how you feel to best deal with it. But I would say empower yourself to know what you're willing to take and how far you're willing to go.
Yeah, I agree. It's having that confidence as well in the
Yeah,
decisions that you've made,
yeah,
and ensure that you have the research or the information or the evidence to back whatever
yeah,
decisions you think are best for your department, and not even for the department alone, but ultimately our children or students, because
yes,
ultimately, they're at the core of all decisions that we make. So if you feel like you're being micromanaged, it's important to always, you can ask the questions, how will this impact the students? And make sure that you do have a voice and that you express how you're feeling about that particular decision. And you're right, Jenniece, be diplomatic about it. Sometimes just, silently do what you think is best and ensure that the outcome supports all stakeholders. Now, I have another amazing question for you, but we're going to go for a break, and I'm going to share the question so you can think about it during the break, and then we will listen to our sponsors. So, one of our listeners is asking, what advice would you give to a leader whose team appears to have become disheartened and distrusting of their leadership? So, there's lack of trust, and people have become disheartened. What advice would you give to such a leader? So, think about
okay,
it. And when we come
okay.
back, we will discuss further. Stay tuned, everybody.
Need a smarter way to teach? Wish your lessons had more impact? Eduflix.com. Stream educational films for teachers and students in or out of the classroom. Keep students engaged. No ads. No distractions. Try it free for 30 days at eduflix.com/try. Use code TTR. Get 50% off all orders made before June 1st. eduflix.com.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Don't miss out. Level up your professional development today and visit johncattbookshop.com to explore the full range of titles. Use the code JCTTR2425 for 20% off your order.
And welcome back, everyone. Those of you who are online, wherever you're joining from, wherever in the world, in the UK, in the UAE, in Jamaica even, thank you so much for joining us. And thanks for sharing with us today and asking all the questions. This has been such an insightful discussion so far. Jenniece, thank you so much.
Thank you.
You've given a wealth of information here and some really good words of wisdom and lots of takeaways, which I will hope to sum up at the end of the show. So before we went on that break, we had this question: what advice would you give to a leader whose team appear to have become disheartened and distrusting of their leadership?
Okay. For me, I would answer by saying that, I'm a firm believer in people-centered leadership, building relationships. So my leadership style is, I would say, describe it as inspirational and empathetic. And so by empowering individuals and recognizing their strengths and providing opportunities for people to grow is always it's all you can't lose with that. People want to grow. People want to find out how they can get better instead of just thinking about what they're not good at. Think about praising them. Think about how you can actually support them in their growth. I lead by example, setting high expectations for myself and fostering a culture of collaboration. That's another thing as well. Don't just say all the time, I did this, I did that. What about talking about a teamwork experience? So we did this together. We are doing this now. I think that will make people feel that they're trusted and they're supported by their head of department or whatever capacity you're in. Use evidence informed strategies. So I normally tailor my leadership to the needs of my team. So, for instance, I inspire. I normally use what's his name, Adam Robbins, Middle Leadership Mastery,
Mhm.
and he talks about the two kind of people who you're trying to make sure that you're engaging with, the two kind of team um, team players that you're engaging with. You have the kind of rock star versus the pop stars,
Mhm.
and how they both need different things and how you can actually hone in on their skills, and strategically manage those high performing individuals to build a balanced and effective team, driving the school forward and making sure that they can have an impact on students' outcomes as well as their own individual goals. So it's all about collaboration. It's all about empowering your team members. I think that will build trust.
Yeah, and you said they're facilitating your high performance, knowing your team, knowing
Yes.
the skill set within your team, and facilitating accordingly. But what if
Yes.
the team is now fractured? What advice would you give a leader of that particular team of how to bring the team back together because they've now lost trust?
Hmm.
So these things you've mentioned, we do that immediately, right? But
Hmm.
what do you do now that you're halfway through this leadership journey with your team? And you're nearing the end of the academic year, for instance, and it's so fractured. How do you bring it back and
Yeah.
regain trust?
You bring it back by having those hard or challenging conversations, because you can't be a leader without having hard, challenging conversations. And it might be difficult, but you have to do it. There's no other way. You have to communicate with your team, because at the end of the day, you cannot do it by yourself. It takes a team effort to drive
Mhm.
to drive a department, to drive attainment, and to actually action the vision that you set out to do at the start of the year. So I would sit down with my team, and if you need to, maybe have a third party join you so that there is a non-biased person in the room while
Mhm.
you are having those kind of conversations as well, but they will appreciate that you're not hiding from them, and that you actually give them the time and the space to speak. um yeah, so I would
Yeah.
start there.
Yeah, completely agree. And you've hit the nail on the head. You can't hide.
Hmm.
And you've got to have those fierce conversations. And we mentioned that briefly last week as well. You've got to make sure you provide the space for people to be able to have these conversations, and making sure that it's a safe space, making sure as well that we have the level of maturity where we don't take things so personally, or we begin to use these conversations or the things that are revealed against the individuals, but we
Hmm.
use it to develop our own character, to do our own self reflection, and to improve our leadership. And that takes a lot of guts, but it's a true sign, it's a sign of a true leader when you're able to give people the space to express how they're feeling, um, not to take it as a personal attack, but to use it to ensure that you rebuild the trust. And you're
and
then,
and and if
yeah,
and if you get it wrong, say so.
mhm. Say it.
You own up to it as well.
Yeah.
You just say, listen, I got it wrong this time, how can I fix things?
Exactly. And I shared some examples last week, last fortnight about that as well. Owning it and saying, right, yeah, that was not the best decision. Uh, but let's come together and see how we can improve this. And it's okay to say that. And I think it comes with experience, and it comes with a certain level of maturity. I find that when you're a younger leader, you try to save face. And so you will hide behind things, or not be too transparent because you don't want to be seen as weak, or you don't want to be seen as not very competent. And so we probably in our more youthful years take a back seat, not necessarily take a back seat, but not to be so bold to come forward and say, right, I got this wrong. But it's important that as leaders, we do that. We'll get the trust, we'll gain the trust of the team to start with, and then we can build on other relationships as a result of that. Thank you so much for sharing. So that's the message to the person who asked that question. I hope the response helped. 100% agree. Being reflective is key, and finding solutions, not running away from the issue. Exactly. We've got to face it and
Yeah.
deal with it and move on. So, Jenniece, have you ever faced pushback for being too real? What was said and how did you respond? So you don't have to name any organization, but
Yes. Yes, I've definitely had moments where my honesty made people uncomfortable. More recently, it's been around budgets. Actually, it's not just recently. It's been a couple of years that, in schools, as you know, there's always about the budgets, right?
hmm
My department's funding has been getting smaller and smaller over the couple of years, but the expectation is stays the same, if not higher. So they want more things, um, but with less funding. So it's always been an issue. I've had to have frank conversation about that though, what that means in real terms, maybe fewer educational trips,
hmm
reduce training opportunities for staff, and obviously the impact on students' outcomes as well. I brought evidence to support this sort of message, but also bring solutions and alternative ideas of how we can probably stretch the resources without compromising on the quality.
hmm
For me, being real doesn't mean being confrontational.
Yeah.
It means being just clear and constructive, and considering alternative solutions, and a commitment to doing the right thing by our students and staff.
Yeah, totally agree. And it's important to note that there will always be pushbacks. It's the nature of the
Hmm.
profession and just work being with other human beings. There will be pushbacks because people have their own opinions. And you're right, it's not about being confrontational, but it's making sure that we have all the things in place to prove why we want to push our particular agenda. And hopefully, one of these days, budget will not be an issue in schools. I don't know, wishful thinking, but hopefully.
Yes.
How do you navigate difficult conversations? Because a part of being authentic is having those difficult conversations, which you mentioned. So, how
Hmm.
do you navigate these conversations where being honest might hurt someone's feelings or challenge the status quo? How do you
Um,
navigate?
Navigating conversations requires us to take care because we're dealing with people,
Mm-hmm,
and it requires us to have clarity. I always start by checking my intent. Am I saying this to be right, or am I saying this to move the conversation forward in alignment with the school vision?
mm-hmm,
So in difficult conversation, I often kind of approach it with the facts, not criticisms. Um, you can challenge the system, but still respect the people within it. There needs to be a balance that makes the conversation productive rather than painful.
mm-hmm. I completely agree. And I'm not going to name the book, but there's a book that talks about how to approach these difficult conversations. And it talks about come out from behind yourself into the
Hmm.
conversation and make it real. So, in other words, be authentic and transparent in the conversation, and suggesting that it requires vulnerability and truth telling, even when it's uncomfortable. So
Yes.
again, holding our hands up to mistakes or wrong judgments, and tackling those tough issues first and not bury the lead. You go straight to the heart of the matter. Yes, it's going to be painful. We've got to rip the band-aid off sometimes, and then that's the only way you can get true healing. And
Hmm.
just to avoid the central issue. If you avoid it, then it will only prolong the tension or the confusion. I'm sure you'll agree with me, Jenniece. If
Yes.
you don't get to the heart of the matter, it gets worse, doesn't it?
It does. I mean, recently a staff member that I line manage responded to a feedback that I gave them about a task with a very condescending and disrespectful tone.
Yeah.
But instead of reacting in the moment to match their energy,
Mm-hmm.
I've made the decision to, pause the conversation to pick up on it later on. Because
Yeah.
if I had matched it, it wouldn't have ended properly. So, sometimes you need to walk away um, from a conversation or a situation, giving both people, yourself and that person, time to breathe and to have space to reflect and to de-escalate the tension or whatever else is happening as well. Because you never know, and somebody might just be having a bad day.
Yes.
Um, so I've learned that navigating difficult conversation isn't about just avoiding honesty. It's about how
Mm-hmm.
you deliver it. Again, I go back to my Jamaican roots. It says, there's a saying that says, it's not what you say, but how you say it.
Oh.
So sometimes
Mm-hmm.
it's the tone of your voice that can just really change the shape of the conversation. So I normally kind of reframe the conversation by asking questions such as, what felt challenging about that feedback, or
Mm-hmm.
maybe I say, what support do you need moving forward? So that this shifts the tone from confrontation to collaboration.
Mm-hmm.
Because in leadership, you don't always have to win in the moment. It's not
Yes.
about winning, right? It's not about winning. You have to build a relationship with your team. Going back to what we talk about trust, you need to let them trust you, because that's what sustains progress over a long time.
Yeah, ultimately, it's responding with humility. You're so right.
Hmm. Yeah.
If the tone isn't right from the other person, there's no point trying to match the tone because it's just going to escalate, as you said. And
Yeah.
also, it's important that as a leader, when you're asking questions or you have to have these conversations, is that we should not make assumptions. We can't
Mhm.
assume that everyone shares the same understanding of a situation because their interpretation might be different. And I mentioned this in last fortnight's show that we've got the unconscious bias. And you
Mhm.
might say something to me or give me some feedback, but contextually, I'm thinking about something else, linking it to what you've said, which had no bearing on what you've said when you were sending it, but we misinterpret. And so it's so important that as leaders, we understand that. And you're right, ask the questions, what made you feel that way? Rather than clapping back immediately. And you
Mhm.
know what it's like, Jenniece, as Jamaicans, we're really good at that, aren't we?
Yes.
We clap
And
back.
so that's why I tell you, as I like having that internal staff meeting with myself before before it gets external. I talk to myself. How is this gonna sound when it comes out, Jenniece?
Yeah, thank you so much. And believe it or not, we've already done the first hour of the show. We've got the last 30 minutes to go. And we've learned so much so far. I'm sure those of you who are listening online will agree with me that we've learned so much from our guests tonight. I am so honored to have you on the show, Jenniece. You've been a wealth of information tonight. Thank you so much.
Thank
And
you.
before we take the news, could you share with us in your experience, what's the biggest myth about authenticity in leadership or professional settings? What are some of those myths?
One of the biggest myths about authenticity in leadership is that it's a one size fits all approach,
Mm-hmm.
as being authentic only looks like one kind of leader, like the person has to be loud and the person has to look this way and dress this way. But authenticity isn't a performance, as I've mentioned early on. It can be quiet, it can be calm, and I feel like I'm one of those people who, calm and quiet, and I do a lot of things in the background, building systems, and making sure that things are organized. And I feel like people have that myth in their head that a person has to be a particular type.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the second thing that I kind of mentioned early on as well, that authenticity has to be a fixed state. And as I said, it's it's having an ongoing conversation with yourself, and it's about growth and where you are in your career.
Mm-hmm. And being reflective as well as you
Yes.
go along. Thank you so much. We're going to take another break, but this time for the news. And when we come back, we will round up the show with a few more questions. And if you do have any questions for a guest or myself, please do ask, and we will help as much as possible to answer those questions. So do stay tuned. We're going over now to Jill Fox for the news.
Need a smarter way to teach? Wish your lessons had more impact? Eduflix.com. Stream educational films for teachers and students in or out of the classroom. Keep students engaged. No ads. No distractions. Try it free for 30 days at eduflix.com/try. Use code TTR. Get 50% off all orders made before June 1st. Eduflix.com.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Don't miss out. Level up your professional development today and visit johncattbookshop.com to explore the full range of titles. Use the code JCTTR2425 for 20% off your order.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and this is Teachers Talk Radio News.
Schools Week reports on pupil numbers in England schools as new data is released. The number of pupils has fallen for the first time in over a decade as the system passes what the report calls a demographic tipping point. The data also shows that for the first time, there are now more academies in England than council-maintained schools. The Department for Education has published its annual Schools, Pupils and Their Characteristics dataset, which is based on the school census of January 2025. Pupil numbers have been rising steadily since the early 2010s, but the latest data shows that overall numbers dropped by over 59,000 in January. Primary pupil numbers have been falling for several years, but secondary numbers are due to peak in 2027 before falling as the bulge moves out of compulsory education. The number of academies has increased from 10,640 to 11,280, and data also shows 58.4% of pupils now attend academies, up from 56.2% last year. Overall schools in England, including independent, 83% of secondary schools and 41.6% of primary schools are now academies. 49% of special schools are academies. This year, the average infant class size decreased from 26.6 pupils to 26.2, the lowest since 2009. Average class size at Key Stage 2 remained stable, with only a slight rise at secondary. Private pupil numbers have dropped by 1.9%, around 11,000, compared with last year, leaving the independent school population similar to that in 2021 to 22. The report says it's not clear where those pupils have gone, as secondary pupil numbers rose by less than 1,500 over the same period, while primary numbers fell by 60,000. Data also shows that whilst pupil numbers may have fallen, there are 35 more private schools operating this year compared to last. There was a big increase in local authority placements of pupils into alternative provision, up 24% on the previous year. Numbers increased for those in school-arranged AP as well, with 16,600 registered with an AP and another 11,100 who are dual registered. Full details and further statistics are available on the Schools Week website. BBC Scotland News featured comments from Scotland's largest teachers' unions, who have described the workload in schools as unfair, unhealthy and unsustainable. EIS General Secretary Andrea Bradley said the union was set to ballot members over strike action because the Scottish Government had failed to reduce the amount of time teachers must spend in the classroom. Almost 3/4 of those who took part in a union survey said they were rarely or never able to do the work, prep or marking they had been asked to do within their working week. The survey was completed by around 20% of the EIS membership. 44% of respondents said they usually worked the equivalent of an extra day a week. 1/4 said they worked an extra 2 days. Only 1% of those surveyed said they had sufficient time to complete paperwork, liaise with colleagues and external agencies, and attend meetings about pupils. Ms. Bradley said the survey told a story of persistent excessive workload demands, and that 4 years on from a government pledge to reduce teachers' class contact time, there has been absolutely no progress towards delivering it. The Scottish Government said, "We are providing local authorities with an additional £186.5 million to restore teacher numbers." More details can be found online. The BBC also reports that compulsory education for Isles of Scilly pupils is costing thousands. The islands are one of only 2 local authority areas in England with no sixth form provision, and as a result, students need to travel to other parts of the country. In 2015, it became a legal requirement for young people in England to stay in education, employment or training until the age of 18. In recent years, there have been 15 to 32 Scilly children in each post-16 year group, with 2 year groups completing their sixth form education at any one time. Island children say they have to get a boat or plane up to 12 times a year and stay in accommodation during term times, often with host families, at a cost of around £9,000 per year, not including travel. And as the cost of living goes up, prices have risen too. Parents can get a grant of around £9,635 to help, but some now say that this is not enough. Parents who spoke to the BBC also say that the travel and accommodation process can raise safeguarding concerns, as DBSs for host families remain optional. Full details, including comment from parents, councils and Department for Education, can be found on BBC Cornwall. Finally, two schoolgirls from County Fermanagh in Northern Ireland are campaigning for legislation to force schools to offer girls a choice between skirts and trousers. The girls have previously successfully campaigned for their primary school to allow girls to wear trousers, and says it's weird and unfair that some schools still enforce skirts. They are taking their case to Stormont as part of a hearing into broad changes to school uniform law. Education Minister Paul Givan said the decision on skirts lies with individual schools, but that the new proposals include making uniforms more affordable. Full details and reaction from pupils at both primary and secondary schools can be found on BBC Northern Ireland News. This has been Teachers Talk Radio News with Joe Fox.
Well, thank you, Joe. It's always fascinating for me to hear the news and all the latest happening in the UK. Workload will always be an issue, and something I hope at some point we'll be able to create that real balance so that teachers will feel better when it comes to well-being. Welcome back, everyone, and thank you so much for staying tuned. I think we have a question already for you, Jenniece, and thank you as well, Jenniece, for joining us tonight and for sharing with us so raw and so honest and so open. We really appreciate that. Somebody's asking, when dealing with different cultures, how much prep time do you need to deal with the cultural differences? I'm not so sure I fully understand that because I don't know if we get separate time to deal with different cultures.
I
So,
think what
mhm,
I'm understanding from that is
mhm.
when you start working overseas, I think most
Okay.
organizations, most schools, they tend to have like a 2 week period where you are sensitized to the culture before you start working. So there is a time when they're debriefing you about what to expect, how to dress, how to speak. And I mean, things that you might even take for granted in the UK. For example, if you're having a parents' evening and you normally, shake the hand of the father as they come up to you. It's quite different working in the Middle East. I've had to learn really quickly as well that you're not allowed to shake the hand
Mhm,
of a
mhm,
male person as well. So I think things like that you have to get debriefed about.
mhm.
And I think in most schools overseas, they do offer a period of assimilation into the culture.
Yeah, they do actually, and based on my own experience, yes, and it's ongoing as well. It's not just a one-off. They usually
Yes.
give you refresher courses as well. So my interpretation of this question, actually, when I read it, was within your team, because the focus is on leadership. I thought you were asking the person online if within our teams do we have enough time to learn how to deal with the cultural differences that might be within a team, but I guess you're probably talking about it from a more general perspective.
Hmm.
Yeah. Okay. So we're going to carry on with the show. And I was just taking notes of all the things that we've talked about tonight and all the things that Jenniece has shared with us. And I will round up at the end and share that back with us as well. But what strategies or habits help you to stay grounded and true to yourself when everything around you is telling you to play the game? How do you stay grounded in your truth?
Um, One of the key things that makes me grounded is honesty. Being rooted in my Jamaican heritage, I feel pride in my identity, and I want to be positive role model, as I said, to the next generation. The next thing is that I'm a reflective practitioner. I draw on a lot of strength from my lived experience,
Mm-hmm.
especially in my time teaching internationally. When
Mm-hmm.
things get pressured or political, I often think back to those early environments and the lesson that I've learned about
Mm-hmm.
myself and about adaptability, about different perspectives, and about staying rooted in my purpose and my vision. And then lastly, I think I'm a lifelong learner, which keeps me resistance to just playing the game. I actively seek out voices that challenge and inspire me, whether those are podcasts like this or
Mm-hmm.
professional network or reading. The last book I read was a book called Courageous Leadership by
Oh, yeah.
Diana Osaki,
Mm-hmm.
and I've really shaped my mindset in terms of, she talks about leading with integrity even when the stakes are high, and that stays with me. So I found that, you know, when when you're a reflective practitioner, and that you make learning a part of your routine, you build a
Mm-hmm.
kind of inner compass. So even when the pressure is on, or the politics is loud, you still know who you are and what kind of leader you are and you want to become.
So, do you think it's possible to advance in your leadership career without playing the game?
Yes, I do think so. Because you can make your own game.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I think that you don't have to, as I said, you don't need to shrink to fit in. And I found, from my experience, teaching over 20 years, I find that when I don't want to play the game anymore, I move to another pitch and make my own game.
Oh, so when you don't want to play, you find your own pitch. You change the field, and yeah,
Exactly.
you
That's
find a
it.
new pitch, and you create your own game.
Yes. So
Okay.
that's why you have to be adaptable.
Yeah, yeah, and know when a place is not your place.
No, or know when your because everything is a season. Everything has a season. You need to just
Hmm.
know when you that season has ended, because sometimes you've outgrown something, right? And so
Hmm.
you need to know when you need to close a door and open a window.
Yeah. Totally agree. And that comes with you having that honest chat with yourself and
Hmm.
recognizing, is it time to move on to a different pitch and play a different game? If someone feels their authentic self isn't welcome, oh, that takes us to this question, Jenniece. So well timed. If someone feels that their authentic self isn't welcome in their workplace or community, what advice would you give them? You've just done it, but you may want to elaborate a little bit.
Yeah. My advice would be, don't shrink yourself to fit, move on and find a space where you can truly thrive. We spend too much of our lives or working lives at work, to compromise our core values just to survive, right?
Hmm.
So for me, alignment between your personal principles and the culture of the workplace is essential, not just for well-being, but for making a real impact. Because if your energy is drained, you can't make an impact. When that alignment is missing, you're constantly in a resistance mood, and that's going to drain your energy, and you're not going to grow, or you're not going to be able to lead anybody in that, when your energy is low. So I'd say trust your gut. If you feel you're silencing, you're being silenced, or you're being bent too far back,
Hmm.
and trying to fit in, it's a sign that your environment might not be the right one for you. And that doesn't mean that you're less capable at all. It means that your values are intact, and you need to seek out a place where you can thrive. There are places that will recognize and respect what you bring to the table. And when you find that place,
Hmm.
you'll be able to be the best version of yourself.
Yeah, I agree. So it's not only about being authentic to others, but also being authentic to yourself.
Exactly.
Yeah, and knowing when it's time to move on. And it's okay. And we shouldn't really consider it a weakness.
Hmm.
And sometimes people think that it will be used against you if you've moved on from a few schools here and there. And For me, I've moved around quite a bit, and
Mm-hmm.
sometimes it's not necessarily because I don't feel welcome. On some occasions, that has been the case. But often, when I feel like I'm no longer inspired and I'm getting a little bit bored and I need to get to the next level, then I will sometimes move along. And I remember once a principal said to me, "Right, Missy, you need to find a place and stick." And stop moving around. And unfortunately, I still haven't. I'm yet to take that advice, Jenniece, because even in this old age, I'm still I'm still moving on when I
Yeah.
see fit. So it's important that we are authentic to ourselves as well.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that as well because I find that I like moving around as well. In fact, after the pandemic is the longest that I've been in one place, and
Hmm.
that's because I'm always looking for a place to learn and to place to grow. And I feel like if I hadn't moved along and get outside the UK, now I can say that I can teach three different curriculums. So not only do
Hmm.
I teach the UK curriculum, but when I went overseas, I learned and taught the IB curriculum, so MYP
Yeah.
and the DP as well. And when I went to Cairo, in Egypt, I was teaching the American curriculum as well, and you get those rich sense of the different perspectives and the different landscape of how the different curriculum works as well. So I wouldn't have gotten that richness if I'd stayed in
Mhm.
one place. I wouldn't have had that opportunity. So sometimes you have to go out and seek those opportunities as well.
I completely agree, and it's almost like a tapestry of
Hmm.
experience, and you develop so much more when you go in different environments. I completely agree with you. I mean, myself, I taught for 8 years in Jamaica, 20 something years in the UK, and now in Dubai myself, and you learn so much. And even within the UK, I taught in so many different settings, the private sector, the state schools, and you begin to understand yourself as well.
Hmm.
And you begin to learn so much more about yourself and how you adjust and adapt to different situations. And it does help with your leadership. Now, we're not suggesting, listeners, that you should just get up and go and just start leaving your schools for the sake of it. No, but you should know when. As Jenniece explained earlier, when you're no longer feeling welcomed and your authentic self has been compromised, then it's time to think about this. And whether this is in the
And
school
to
setting.
for new
Mhm.
experiences as well, not necessarily sometimes when you don't feel welcome, because you
Mhm.
can feel welcome, but you just want to make sure that you are um becoming your greatest version, so you're actively seeking opportunities
Yeah, to
to
grow.
grow as a leader. Yes.
Completely agree. So it's not always negative reasons. We
Yes.
move on because I think I can go back to any of the schools I've left. So it's important also that when you're leaving, it's on good terms if
Hmm.
possible.
Yeah.
And yeah, sometimes it's just to move on to other opportunities and to grow as well professionally.
Yes.
So, what advice would you give new and aspiring leaders, and what pitfalls to avoid? So, I always like to end with this thought at the end.
Right. Stepping into leadership is both an exciting and challenging journey. One of my most important piece of advice I can offer is to stay grounded. Um, don't be fooled by the flattery earlier on, with because I feel like people will flatter you, but they have a totally different agenda. So just stay grounded. The second thing I would say, use discernment. Take your time to understand the landscape that you're working with. And as I've said, depending on the context, you will need to adapt accordingly.
Hmm.
Um, uh, the third thing is value people. I am really big on this in terms of valuing people, because we work in an environment that you have to work with so many different stakeholders, from governors, senior leaders, staff, students, parents. So you have to be able to take time to understand the context, to build relationships. Um, leadership isn't a race to the top. It's a commitment to grow, to serve, and to bring others with you. And some of the pitfalls I would say to avoid is, don't rush to prove yourself, right? Sometimes the most powerful thing is just to listen
Mm-hmm.
and avoid isolation. So the caller earlier on talks about having breaking trust with with their line manager and feeling lonely. I would
Mm-hmm.
say if you can't find the support in your current environment, build a network outside. Find a mentor, find a coach, find a critical friend to support you. Um, Beware of echo chambers,
Mm-hmm.
because I feel like some schools or some environments, people tend to just feel more comfortable with talking that with people that either look like them, sound like them, and so it's just the same thing that keeps repeating. There is no growth in that culture. And then finally, resist the urge to people please. Try to
Mm-hmm.
keep trying to keep everybody happy is not going to be sustainable in the long term. You need to make principled decision on your own. um Remember that leadership is not just a sprint, it's not a one-time event, right? Remember we said it's not a fixed state. um Invest in your own personal development and nurture your well-being. This is something that I'm guilty of sometimes, not nurturing my well-being, but it's
Mm-hmm.
something that you absolutely need to take care of. Be consistent, do what you say that you're gonna do. And yeah, I think those are the things that I
You've
would say.
summed it up really well, Jenniece. Thank you so much. Let me thank everybody who's joined us tonight and for staying with us and listening. I really hope that you've taken something away, something that you may apply in your professional or your personal life. And I'm sure you'll agree with me that Jenniece has been brilliant tonight and she's really opened up and given us a lot to think about and also some very practical tips as well that we can take away immediately and apply to our contexts. Thank you so much, Jenniece, for joining us. I'm so happy that we're able to get this done
Thank
and
you
to
so
share.
much for having me. I really
Yes, it's been
appreciate
a
it.
pleasure, and to share your expertise with us. Clearly, you have so much to share, and I hope that you'll also have another platform where you can continue to. Well, you do some coaching and mentoring, and I really wish you all the best with that as you continue to empower other leaders as well to be the best version of themselves. So tonight we were looking at another series in Leading Without the Mask and how do we maintain our authenticity when we face certain challenges. And with my very special guest tonight, these are some of the takeaways which I've noted. She encouraged us to lead from a place of truth, to be resilient, to be courageous. She reminds us that leadership is not just a title, it's about helping others, knowing your team, being consistent, and making sure that your team members are seen and heard. She reminded us that authentic leadership should not be performative, it can be quiet, and it should not be confrontational. It's about collaboration and being diplomatic, intentional, and discerning in our approach. She also reminded us, and quite aptly, that as leaders, we are not or you are not the finished product. It's ongoing learning and ongoing professional development and ongoing self reflection and self evaluation. She also tells us to avoid pushing without care when the pressure intensifies. How do we handle it? She said, avoid pushing without care, making sure we're managing the pressure and we're managing the people and we're taking care of their well being. Where praise is required, we should not hold back on that. Create opportunities for our staff, know their skill set, and help them to grow accordingly. Ultimately, we've been encouraged tonight to lead with humility, own our mistakes, and be reflective in order to do better next time. Don't shrink to fit in, don't compromise. If the environment is not right for you, then it's okay to move on. But also, we can move on in order to grow because it does help us as leaders. And finally, she said to aspiring leaders, stay grounded, or new leaders, stay grounded. Don't be fooled by the flattery. Take time to understand your context and the people around you. So much to take away. Thank you all for tuning in on Teachers Talk Radio. I do hope tonight's show will help you as a leader to be balanced and to maintain your integrity despite the challenges that we might face as leaders. So once again, thank you for joining, and remember to share the podcast with friends and family. Until the next fortnight, have a lovely evening and walk good.
You've been listening to Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live and listen back at ttradio.org. We look forward to hearing from you next time on Teachers Talk Radio.